Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Harlan Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. Well, now, guess what time it is? It is time for another exciting episode of the Health and Wealth Power Hour. I am your host, Harlan Pickett. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hey, a lot of times we talk about, I won't say frivolous things, but we do talk about various things on the show. A lot of times not as serious. Many times they are, right? But a lot of times, it's nothing heavy. Well, I'm not getting a little bit heady today because you know what? Everything in your life is not always rainbows and unicorns and all the things that we want it to be. Every now and then you have difficulties, and there are times when those difficulties can put you in a spiral that you cannot find a way out of. So today we're going to talk about addiction. And while we have talked about addiction of various kinds in the past, today we're going to be kind of specific in the addiction we're talking about, and we are going to talk about sexual addiction. So I want to give this upfront disclaimer that there could be things that are talked about in the show today that could certainly make you uncomfortable. We are not going to get graphic in any way, shape, or form, but we are going to talk about subjects that certainly could hit close to home, either personally or someone in your family. So I hope that you will stay with us because obviously the goal of the show is to give you some insights, not on just what's occurring with someone, but how to help them or how to help yourself, how to overcome the addiction, not to be cured because that's virtually impossible to have happen, but how to be released from the bondage that addiction can put you in. We are very, very grateful for you to be here today, but more so, we're very grateful for our honored guest. Logan Hufford is with us today to share his story, but more importantly, to share how he was released from that bondage. Logan, welcome aboard the Health and Wealth Power Hour, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, Harlan. I really appreciate this opportunity. Looking forward to diving in with you.
Yeah, when I first saw your profile as we were looking for guests, I have to admit, I kind of took a step back and said, is this a proper thing to talk about on my podcast? Because as I mentioned, a lot of times I won't say we talk about just frivolous things. We talk about important things that are part of your health and wealth, but we typically don't get too dark or deep. But you know what? This is actually a story of redemption. And so sometimes you got to get dark and deep to get back to the light. So I am really, really happy. It is certainly my pleasure to have you here because I think that what you can bring to the table, Logan, for many people out there that may have this same struggle, is you can bring hope. So without beating around the bush anymore, let's kind of dive in to what, if anything, can you say was kind of a point that your life was going along like this and all of a sudden you found yourself falling down this hole?
The points at which my life was so obviously uncontrollable, the points at which the self-hatred was so high, the darkness was so low, kind of thing. There were multiple points. It was never like a specific rock bottom that I found myself there, and until I got to that point, I never realized that I had a big problem, and then from there it was just all the way, this linear journey, just going up. Definitely didn't have that story. It was a lot of points that could have been, should have been maybe their own rock bottoms. And yet I found myself, go up a little bit and then keep digging down. That's one piece that looking back now, I feel pretty strongly about is the idea of a rock bottom is kind of a misnomer. Like it's a true thing, but I can only find a rock bottom, in my opinion, once I've experienced healing and I look back on my life. Because one person's rock bottom is going to be completely different from another person's rock bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree.
So, because, I was blessed to be on a different podcast where, he's a kind of a motto. Craig Brown, his motto is, until the pain of what I'm doing to people outweighs the fear of me reaching out and getting help, I'm not going to get help. Right. And that's absolutely right on. That's how it was for me in my sexual addiction. To give kind of a really like 30,000 foot view, maybe 100,000 foot view, aerial shot of what this thing looked like. I mean, it started off with pornography. It was that for years, from 9 to my teens. And then only until, or it was only like when I was maybe, I don't know, 16 years old or something like that, that like flirting and seeking attention from actual other girls became a thing. And then it wasn't until I was 19 that I actually that I took my sexual addiction to another level of being sexually unfaithful to my fiance, my now wife, Carrie. And once that dam broke, it was this whole other level. Because the whole time it's not an addiction, at least for me, it was not an addiction to sexual activity. It was not an addiction to a specific sexual behavior. It was an addiction to things that are different, things that are new, things that are basically a deeper, darker sexual drug. And so, it might manifest with pornography. It might manifest with seeking attention from girls. It might manifest with, texting and phone calls. It could be all different things. But it was a really long way of trying to answer your question, which is the pain and the self-hatred and those parts of it, those weren't evident until I was married. I definitely knew that I was doing terrible things when I cheated on my fiance, but I was able to lie to myself because we were living separately. We didn't have kids. And I was able to lie to myself and oh, that was just a one-time thing. It'll never happen again. That was terrible, but I would never do it again. Of course, I did it multiple times before I even got married. But each time I somehow believed that I would never do it again. So once I kept doing it after we were married, that was like the first time where I go, oh crap, like I don't know how to stop this, even though I still didn't seek healthy changes. But 6 months after we got married, I wrote a letter to my wife and I confessed that I'd been unfaithful multiple times. And that was the first time I'd ever confessed any sexual infidelity to her. And from then it was the next several years, from 2000, so the end of 2011 up through the summer of 2015, multiple confessions, staggered confessions, where I would feel bad enough about the things that I was doing that I would confess to her, basically to feel better. I'm nauseous, I'm going to vomit. Well, now I walk away and I'm feeling better because I got that crap out of my stomach. She's sitting there covered in this emotional vomit going, oh my gosh, he did it again. So she's in more pain than ever. And I walk away feeling a little bit better because I got it off my chest. And that terrible dance just continued for several years, all the way up through to 2015.
I have to first of all say she has to be a pretty amazing woman. I think some people would say it's the opposite. I think some people would say that she wasn't an amazing woman, that she had something wrong with her to be able to forgive you that many times. But there's obviously another story there that I know is part of your journey, and that there's a faithfulness there while you were unfaithful, there was also a faithfulness on her part, and that you really were going to one day admit these things and truly actually change.
Right.
And that, I think, needs to have a light shined on it too, because there was something being put on her heart there, even while she was covered in all this, that she just didn't give up on. And that in and of itself had to, at one point in time, really make an impact on you.
Yeah, the part of her testimony that she shared, because just to give a brief glimpse, just so that people aren't super confused, like, wait, so he did all this? Are they married? Like, is she just in denial? Like, what's happened? So I got into recovery. She got into recovery shortly after me, in 2016. I got into recovery to heal and work on sexual addiction and work on, all of the underlying crap that led to these behaviors. She got into recovery for sexual betrayal trauma, because of the abuse that I had, done to her, with cheating on her and lying to her and gaslighting her and just completely emotionally abusing her for years. So this has definitely not been a journey of her just, pretending that everything's fine or just ignoring it. It's like, no, this has been hard work recovery for a long time. And then now we get back, by helping others in this way. But when she has shared her testimony, and she shares it much more beautifully than I could, but it, basically, I mean, she goes through various landmarks in her story that she recognizes that, because we had very opposite upbringings. I grew up in a Christ-centered, loving, safe home. Like, those are general statements, but they're true statements. Wasn't a perfect house, but it was a really good upbringing. And she grew up in the complete opposite. She grew up in a broken home, with abuse, with trauma, just the complete opposite. She did not grow up going to church. She did not grow up, hearing about God. And so she runs through in her testimony these various landmarks that she didn't recognize at the time, but God basically put her through, of like, she had an addict father that taught her that she's not going to be able to just rely on a human. That is so that when she was in her darkest times and she realized she can't rely on me, she could rely on God. Even though, of course, no wife wants to think about that on her wedding day, right? And I shouldn't have put her through that. I'm not trying to say that it was okay, but God had all these amazing pieces of redemption for her as well. That God put her through various points in her life where she had to be resilient so that she could make her way through some of these things. And again, I'm kind of butchering it. Yeah. If she's willing to do the podcast at some point, I would love to do a second run and just have her come on and share, because she's like, time and energy wise, just bandwidth wise, I'm not ready for it yet, but I mean, because her story is just beautiful. But you're right. I mean, God had prepared her for years to be able to go through something that no human should have to go through.
Right.
So that she can now be a light, sharing God's faithfulness. And one thing I will say, I mean, I try to be very, very clear on this, and she is as well. She is an amazing woman, and she is a strong woman, and she's a faithful woman. But, if anybody's listening, and to that, those first several years of our marriage and just the hell on earth that I created, I mean, she had every right to leave me. I mean, biblical grounds for divorce. I mean, I was sexually unfaithful multiple times. So it would have been okay for her to be like, Logan, I'm done. I'm gone. This is too much. And so I always emphasize, the strength that she showed. I'm thankful that she stayed with me, because I don't want to have lost her. But the strength that she showed, in my opinion, the strongest thing she ever did was not staying with me. It was in 2015, she finally gave me an ultimatum, and she faced me. She loved me as her husband, but she faced me in that moment as her abuser, as the man that kept abusing her and kept lying to her and kept giving her empty promises. And she finally said in July of 2015, if you don't get help, then you will lose me and the boys. And I just want to emphasize that point. It doesn't make the other parts not true. Like, she was faithful and she was loving, but because if anyone's, if there's a woman out there listening that's going through something like this, I don't want anybody to think, well, the best thing you can do is just stay by your husband no matter what and just love and support him. At some point, for the safety of yourself, kids, standing up to an abuser probably needs to happen. And she did that. And I'm so thankful that she did that.
Well, as I listen to you tell that story, and I know I don't always have the same point of view as everyone else, and that's okay. Both of you had a story in this, right? Both of you were main characters in a story. And in my opinion, the Lord put both of you in each other's lives because each of you were what the other needed. Now, that doesn't mean that she deserved to have all of those things happen to her. I am not saying that whatsoever. I'm saying kind of what you said earlier. The Lord put her in those situations because he knew he was going to provide her the strength to be able to support you still and get you the help that you needed. Let's think of the other side. Let's say in 2012, 2013, 2015 period, she doesn't even give you an ultimatum. She just truly leaves.
Yep.
If that happens, we're probably not having this conversation right now because you may still be down that same rabbit hole. In fact, you might have spiraled even further down that rabbit hole.
Yep.
Instead, the Lord put her through all of those things and finally told her, now is the time that you tell him this.
Yeah.
And gave the proper words for her to say to you for it to finally make an impact and for you to take action. Once again, I look at things a little bit differently. I believe that all of these things are part of the Lord's plan. People ask me, how in the world have I been married for 32 years? I say it's because my wife has patience. That's it. Not because I have patience, but because she does and can put up with me. But the honest to God truth is, it's because the Lord put each of us in each other's lives and we're meant to be together. Otherwise, we could have taken multiple opportunities to not be together because it hadn't been all, unicorns and rainbows, right? There's been ups and downs, just like there is in every marriage.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at it, when you have that mindset, it changes the dynamic between a husband and wife. It changes the dynamic, even in any type of relationship, even with your kids. It changes that. And so I applaud her for staying the course to help you and lead you down that road. And once again, if you're listening today, I hope it doesn't come across as too preachy. I think we're just sharing our faith, and that is important to us. If it's not important to you, hey, we understand that, and I hope that someday it will be important to you. But if it's not important to you today, that's okay. I hope you'll join us for another episode. But let's kind of go back, because you said something that kind of caught me off guard. And maybe I misheard this, but I think you said that your journey down this pathway started at 9.
Yep. And full disclosure, I try to always remember to say this. I mean, I'm kind of arbitrarily picking the number 9, the age of 9.
Okay.
But it was 8 to 10. It was in that range.
Okay.
So maybe I was 8, maybe I was 9.
Not much difference, right?
Okay. I was a young kid, and I was old. I mean, there are some factors that I can look at. I remember this was happening. I remember that was the case. So I could kind of pinpoint, but it was in that range, and it was pre-puberty. It was before I knew what sex was, before I knew what masturbation was, before I knew any of this stuff. So it was in that range. I was a young kid. And number one, I mean, I'm younger than some, I'm older than some, but we're talking late 90s. So there's no iPads laying around. There's no smartphones. There's no smart TVs. And also, as I said before, I mean, I grew up in a really, really good, loving home. That also meant it was a pretty sheltered home. So we had one computer with dial-up internet upstairs that was like, it was not easy to sneak on that thing. That became part of my journey was when on the rare opportunities that I would sneak up there, but it was very, very difficult to do that. So my journey literally started with something that the average person would never say is pornography. I mean, technically it's not pornography. It was pornography as part of my journey. And I'll explain what I mean by that. it was me training myself to objectify women sexually. So by that definition, that's my kind of working definition of pornography is, sexual objectification of women through imagery. Like that's
Okay.
kind of how I define pornography. So by that definition, it was. And here's what it was. You might remember this. Some folks are going to remember this. Like once a year at Christmas time, I think you'd get that giant JCPenney catalog.
Sure.
And at some point, I learned there are women in bikinis and lingerie in this catalog. So again, this is not a Playboy magazine. This is not, hardcore videos that I'm finding. This was something that is in, basically any home at that point. And yet I liked how I felt when I saw these women. And so before I knew what was going on inside my brain, my body, before I knew what to do with myself, I knew that I liked that feeling. And so then it just, over the course of the next several years, it progressed to still photos online, which then progressed to still photos of lingerie and bikinis, not naked women. And then it progressed to naked women, and then it progressed to videos. And then it was just the whole gamut.
Well, and it's interesting that your timeline, because it just so happens technology allowed for that timeline in your particular case.
Yep.
Allowed for that timeline as your interest grew, the availability or the ease of availability for that, both in your age and in the timeline of technology. It's kind of an interesting dynamic there that it just so happened that is the way it worked out. Unfortunately for you, actually, but
you're right. I mean, because YouTube came around when I can't remember, was it 2007 or something? I mean, it was something like that. YouTube came around like when I was in my mid to late teens. This first iPhone came out, I think 2008. I'm 18 years old. So of course, obviously those two things are not evil. Those two things are not pornographic
in and of themselves, correct.
But they are tools that I used, to go chase after things and to get myself into trouble. And when I say get myself into trouble, I do want to say this, especially you're going to have, I'm sure there's folks listening that are very familiar with addiction and recovery. And I'm sure there's also folks that are not as familiar. There's a phrase that used to trip me up, and I think it trips a lot of folks up, especially people in the church, is the idea, and it's part of 12-step recovery that, I had to recognize that I was powerless to stop. I was powerless to control my addiction. So I just want to take a quick moment and just kind of unpack that a little bit, because again, I used to look at that phrase and be like, "What? That's an excuse. That's a cop-out. That's like I'm blaming this disease, this nebulous thing, as if this thing happened to me. It's not my fault." And so I really pushed back on that verbiage, and I've heard other people, again, especially Christians, really push back on that. And and so they have a problem with the addiction model. They have a problem with recovery. They have a problem with all this stuff. It's like, if God, you need God to just heal you. You don't need recovery. You don't need a program. And the way I look at it is this, because two statements are true. I was powerless to stop. I also was responsible for my choices. And those two things are not mutually exclusive as much as they might seem like it. So if you picture, my addiction was like, I got myself into this deep, dark cave of sexual addiction. Every step I took to get into that cave, I took those steps. I made those choices. I'm responsible for those choices. However, I also at some point found myself in this deep, dark cave, trapped, going, I hate my life. I hate that I'm in here. I don't know how to get out. I don't even know if I can get out. So I couldn't just snap my fingers or switch a toggle switch off and just be done with my addiction. That was not possible. I couldn't just stop. I mean, habits and ways that my brain was literally rewired because of years of habit forming, because of years of basically depraved thought processes. I couldn't just flip a switch and turn all that off. It was going to take time to rewire that. Now, could God have flipped a switch? Yes. God could have just snapped his fingers. But I mean, if we look at the Bible, that's usually not what God does. God usually wants us to go through a journey, right? God usually wants I mean, whether it's Paul, whether it's Peter, I mean, tons of stories in the Old Testament. I mean, God could have just flipped a switch and Logan never again was tempted. But I mean, you said something at the start of this conversation that I'm going to circle back to, which is, you know, we got to talk about the darkness to look at the light, the redemption. And I mean, I hold that very dearly because I don't dwell in a dark space at this point. I don't dwell in a dark space when I think about recovery, but I do have vivid memories of how dark my life used to be.
Sure.
Spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, everything. And I'm thankful for that, because if I didn't remember how incredibly dark and evil my life was, I wouldn't cherish what my life is today nearly as much, nearly the same way. And when I say the way that my life is, I mean, it's the full gamut. I get to cherish my salvation. I get to cherish my wife, cherish my boys, you know, cherish just, you know, sitting around with my boys, you know, watching some outdoor channel on YouTube, or just having a movie night, or going on a walk with, you know, the family, like just whatever it is. I cherish those things so deeply because I remember what it was like to be a dad of, you know, my boys, and a husband to my wife, coming home just wishing nothing more than for God to just kill me just right then and there because of the evil that I was doing. I know I'm off on a tangent here, but all that is to say, you know, I guess I want to emphasize kind of what that looks like for me to be responsible for my choices while also not being able to suddenly just flip the switch.
Well, and so I want to point something out, and maybe I'm completely wrong here. I can tell you that this thought occurred to me that if you can't remember how dark it was, then the natural thing for you to start doing is to say, well, you know, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe it wasn't that bad. And that's a slippery slope that leads right back to where you were, right? That's an absolute disaster waiting to happen. That's relapse city. That's all of these things, because
Yep.
I think that is what happens many times is people forget how dark it was, or what a certain thing does to them or makes them like, or what it does to others around them whenever they engage in whatever addiction that is. And once again, that's a slippery slope that leads you back into that addiction, or even another addiction. We've all seen that, right? We've all seen someone get away from one addiction and then all of a sudden they're in another one. I mean, I'll use one that I think is the most common, that many people will say is not as bad as some of them could be, but it certainly can be health-wise. And that is, I quit smoking, but now I can't stop eating, right? I gave up my smoking addiction. You know, I was at 150 pounds. Yeah, now I'm at 350 pounds, but I don't smoke no more.
Yep.
So it can be any of these things, right? It really can be any of these things that if you don't remember what it was like, and you don't remember what it did to other people, and you don't reconcile it as a dark place, it's much more difficult to get over it.
Yeah. I'm absolutely right there with you. And it's something that, you know, I talk about with my boy. My boys they're still young, but they're not little kids quite the same anymore. We got 4 boys.
Wow.
We're in the middle of birthday season. So they're 12, 11, 10, 8. But we talk about all the time, you know, whether we're reading through the Bible, we're just talking about life, we're watching a movie. It's like, you know, it's not good guys versus bad guys. It's humans, and every human is capable of doing the worst things. And while I'm not thankful for the things that I did, I am thankful for the lessons that it enables me to teach my boys, for the lessons that it's taught me, that if I go away from God, if I go away from healthy infrastructure that God's given me, whether I would go right back into the old ways that I used to do things, or like you said, I would go into other, you know, ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I keep, you know, there's all these images from scripture that come back to me, right? It is, you know, the Israelites, you know, continually following that cycle, right, of getting themselves in trouble, crying out to God, being delivered, you know, whether it's in Judges or whether in, you know, in Canaan, whatever. And of course, I mean, I do that, but my my hope is that I do that I want to be careful how I say this. I hope I do that in smaller cycles that get caught quicker, instead of, oh crap, I'm fully back into addiction. It's like, okay, I'm starting to get angry and I recognize that and okay, I need to confess this. I need to work on things. But if I try to go away from healthy infrastructure and go away from the tools God's given me, absolutely, I'm just going to go right back into a double life, deceit, feeding other things other than, my relationship with Christ. And that's not a place I want to be.
And, once again, I hear what you're saying. I feel this way too. And I want people to understand that just because you've turned your life over to the Lord, that you've been saved, we are in no way, shape, or form perfect. We are in no way, shape, or form not sinning every single day. Every single day, we all, our goal should be to be like Jesus, but we will never be Jesus. We'll never reach our goal. That's a kind of a sad thing to say, right? But we're never actually going to reach our goal until he comes to take us home.
Right.
That's a whole different thing. That we're actually going to achieve it, but we're going to achieve it on his terms, not ours, right? But I think that is a misconception that still many people have, is they say, "Oh, you're one of those people. You're one of those holier than thous. You don't do anything wrong. I promise you. I promise you." Once again, remember how I talked about my wife has patience? Okay, all right. Just ask her. I'm sure she'll give you a whole list of stuff. But my point here is, it's not just addiction, right? It's not just the struggles you have with daily. It's not just about something that's going to knock you back in. It's something that you just have to understand that we all face those battles every single day.
Right.
The good news for those of us that have been saved is we ask for forgiveness, and when we are forgiven, and we are forgiven for those, the only one that brings those back up to us is us. And which is crazy. It actually is crazy, right? Because we're the ones that beat ourselves up over things that have already been forgiven.
Yeah, I can be my own worst prosecuting attorney if I'm not careful, right?
Yeah. And that's just
like, you're pardoned.
Yeah. But that's just as bad. That's one of the worst things you can do, because then it's so easy to get back in a dark place whenever you're sitting there persecuting or prosecuting yourself, whichever way you want to call that. Because we are our own worst. Our mind can be such a detrimental place to live. Some of us, it's even scarier than others. But it's one of those things where it's so difficult to overcome. But I believe that you probably have a little bit of a leg up there. And I'm going to say that in the sense that because of the recovery that you went through and those steps that you went through, you actually have processes that you learned to help deal with that, to not let yourself go as far, because you know kind of how to handle some of those things. Can you share a few of the things that you learned to help people process through those situations?
Absolutely. And a couple of things that come to mind just as you were unpacking that. So number one, I want to start, I want to just piggyback on something you talked about in terms of not being perfect. And I was having a conversation with somebody from somebody who has an addiction and recovery background, but in a completely different realm, not a Christian, and this is substance abuse. And the only reason I even say that is just, there's differences, but there's a lot of commonalities, right?
Yeah, right.
And just talking about the fact that if I'm getting healthier, if I'm continually working on myself, that's good. Those are good things. But what that also means is that I have to be careful, and this comes to your point, is I have to be careful, because that's also going to bring a lot more self-awareness as I go. And so it can easily feel like I'm backsliding, or am I just the crappiest person? Because what's happening is I'm constantly uncovering new areas to work on. I'm constantly uncovering, oh my gosh, okay, God, you've delivered me from this, and you've helped me with this. But man, I really struggle with ego, and man, I really struggle with anger, and oh my gosh, okay, you've helped me with anger. And yet I can be such a selfish jerk sometimes. And I think overall it is a good thing. I mean, that's the process of sanctification. That's God helping me continually work on my faults and my defects and these areas that I need. But but if I'm not careful, it can take me down, and it can feel really negative. Like, am I any different? Am I just the worst? And if I zoom out, I go, no, I am very different. Thanks to God, I do not do the same things that I used to do, but I'm always going to struggle. I'm always going to have areas that need work. So, I mean, on a very practical level, to your question about some of those tools. So I mentioned I give back, and my wife Carrie gives back, and that's absolutely we absolutely do that. But I mean, I also hugely benefit from recovery. I'm not hiding from that one bit. So like I lead a group for men struggling with sexual addiction, but I also get current at that group where every week I'm sharing how my week has been, and that's not like a formality just to make it seem like I'm one of the guys. No, I need to be accountable. I have a text thread with 2 other mentors, guys that have healing, that have, a lot of growth in this area, and guys that know me. They know my story. They know my struggles. They know the ins and outs of who Logan is and who Logan was. And literally we use that text thread every day, whether it's a specific struggle, a temptation, or I sprained my ankle this morning playing basketball, and I texted the guys because I always have to be careful with my anger. So I texted the guys and said, yep, I got angry and said a couple words that I shouldn't have said. And I slapped the bleachers in anger. And it's not, I mean, the reason why I put that out there is literally because those guys hold me accountable, and they'll ask me questions. Okay, so like what's Logan's next move? What's Logan going to do to not spiral? I mean, that's a real example. So, heavy duty accountability with people that know me, that yes, they're safe. Yes, I can trust them, but safe does not equal comfortable. Safe does not equal easy or enjoyable. Safe might mean that they love me so much that they are not about to let me get away with my crap that I used to try to pull on people, manipulating the room and manipulating other people and being overly vague and hiding behind certain verbiage. Like, yes, they're safe, but sometimes I don't enjoy the questions and the feedback.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily fun to get poked in the gut and have people call you out. So I mean, accountability is huge, and that's something that's never gone away. On a more of like a kind of more of a broad, just a principle thing is, one of the best things that's come out of recovery for me is the power and control issues that I still struggle with, but just recognizing, the importance of, and of course, this is not just a recovery thing. I mean, there's incredible books that focus on this that are not recovery focused, but focusing on what I can control, focusing on the things that I can control, and then leaving the rest up to God. Or if somebody's not a Christian, they could say, I'm going to leave it up to the universe or whatever, but I believe in God. I believe that God has his plan. So yeah, I mean, are there things I can be doing? Absolutely. And I need to be doing those things, but the outcome is not under Logan's plan. The outcome is not under Logan's control. And I can either be okay with that, or I can or I can freak out and be resentful and, be anxious and all these different things. One more thing I'll just put out there this is a principle, but it's also a very practical thing. So there's different recovery structures. There's different type of groups, different programs. I'm not here to dump on any other group of if there's a group where people are seeking to get healing and they're seeking to help others, I'm all about it. But not all groups are created equal. And a group is only as strong as the people leading it and what the group believes in. That's my opinion. So in the groups that I have been a part of for the last 8 years, and the group that I lead, we do things a little bit differently. And that is when a guy or I suppose if there was a female, like in Carrie's group, but in my group, I'm speaking for that, a guy gets current, he shares how his day has been. He shares how his week has been. He shares whatever struggles and areas of weakness and whatever that looks like. Well, then he stops talking and he opens it up to feedback and questions. And most groups do not allow for that. It's called crosstalk. and people are not allowed to talk across the table. And we do not subscribe to that, because the last thing I needed was a place where I could just feel comfortable and safe from feedback. I needed guys to poke me in the gut. I needed guys to ask me tough questions. And I also needed to learn, this is that third principle, I had to learn to shut up and listen. Because I like talking and I like to be in control of the conversation. So, through recovery, God taught me the value of shutting up, listening, absorbing what the other guy had to say, not necessarily doing everything that he advised me to do, not necessarily taking everything as golden nuggets, but at least chewing on it. And if I choose to spit it out, I spit it out. But at least chewing on it and considering, is there wisdom here? Is there something here that could be helpful to me? And all of those things that I just mentioned are not normal things that normal people do on a daily basis. Because a lot of, they're awkward, they're forced, or they're, shutting up and listening while somebody else is giving me 10 points of feedback. Like, that's just not how normal conversation works. That'd be considered rude. And yet I needed that. And I'm so thankful, because those things help me, to your point, they help me go through life and process stressors, temptations, frustrations, all these things that we deal with on a daily basis.
And so while you're talking about feedback, part of getting feedback is the accountability that you talked about. And accountability is what this is really all about, right? There is no overcoming anything, whether it's minor, major, whether it's truly an addiction or it's just a bad habit, because there is a difference between an addiction and a bad habit. But the accountability can look in a lot of different ways. One of the things that I noted on some of the things that you like to share about is how to build that accountability infrastructure. So talk a little bit about what that looks like for somebody, because not everyone's in the same position. Not everyone can have mentors that they can bounce stuff off of. They can text and say, I sprained my ankle and I said a couple of words I shouldn't have. And then how do you look for that? How do you get that infrastructure set up? Well, what are your recommendations? Obviously, whatever your comments are not necessarily going to apply to everybody, but in a general overall way, what's a good way to start setting up an accountability infrastructure?
The first thing I have to do, you just mentioned it in passing, is I have to look for it. And that might seem like, well, obviously, and yet, for years, I was not looking for that. Was I looking kind of sort of for God to flip a switch and for me not to struggle? Yeah, I kind of wanted that, but I didn't want to have to do work. I didn't want to have to open myself up. I was willing at some points to even share my story, and share with a pastor, but I still wasn't looking for somebody to be deeply involved in my decision-making. So the first thing I have to do is recognize I need people to be involved in my decision-making. I need people to be giving me feedback, and I got to look for it. And I believe, now this, maybe some people are going to hear this and they're going to be like, okay, that makes so much sense. And other people are going to hear this and go, this is too vague. This is too nebulous. But I believe if I seek, and I believe that, the Bible's clear on this. If I seek discernment, if I seek wisdom, if I seek healing, I will find that. Now, it might take a while. Carrie gave me an ultimatum in July of 2015. My sobriety date's May 19th, 2016. So if you're doing the math at home, that's almost a year. Now, was I earnestly looking like with 100% steadfastness? No. I there was various points of playing around and like kind of sort of taking it seriously, but not really. But God put people in my path. He opened doors and said, hey, you can either walk through this door or you can ignore it. The choice is yours. And so, God put people in my life that announced themselves, or God announced them, kind of thing. So, for somebody listening in Orlando, Florida, or San Antonio, or, Fresno, I obviously don't know exactly what resources are available or exactly who might they be introduced to. But if a guy is listening and he desires some accountability, he desires healing, then if he goes out and earnestly looks for it, I do believe he will find it. And I'm willing to help as much as I can. I mean, if folks want to reach out, with a question, I'm more than happy to jump on a phone call, reach out to respond to an email. Not that I would, I mean, realistically, I don't do this for a living. I'm not going to be the one to be their mentor for the rest of their life yet. But can I be a hand that reaches down into the pit? Absolutely. But a guy has to be willing to look and to talk to multiple people. It might be that he opens up to a pastor. It might be that he opens up to a therapist, whether it's a sexual addiction specific therapist, which I did not realize that was a thing. It absolutely is a growing niche of therapists that are specifically trained for this. It might mean opening up to, a trusted brother or friend or whatever that looks like. And as I'm listing all those things, I want to be clear and emphasize, if I'm opening myself up to people, that carries risk.
Right.
So I'm not pretending that couldn't bring hurt. If I'm going to be vulnerable, it absolutely can bring hurt. So I'm not pretending that this is an easy, nothing about this is a linear journey. Right? Yeah. But it's what I need. So, how do I build accountability? I open myself up. I make myself vulnerable. I seek accountability. I seek people that are healthy enough to give me good advice, that care enough about me to not just be nice and nod their head and go, "Oh, that sounds good. Thanks for sharing, Logan." But they're actually going to say, "Well, hold on, Logan. You've been saying this, that you're going to work on, I'm just going to make this up. But well, Logan, you say that, every Friday you go to this restaurant after work and you tend to flirt with the waitress there. You've been saying this for the last 6 weeks. Have you considered sitting at a different table? Have you considered not going to that restaurant? Have you considered not going out to eat after work?" I'm just making that up, but these types of questions that, to a healthy person seem pretty obvious. But for me, when I'm stuck in my addiction, when I'm stuck in unhealthy thinking, I mean, the types of things that I would do are mind-blowingly destructive and dangerous now, but that's just how I lived my life.
Yeah. Yeah. If you didn't think of it that way, for sure.
Yeah. And if you, okay, so we're all listening and we're all talking in different areas of the world, different areas of the country, but there's people outside every, if we're in any sort of populated area, you look outside your office building or, outside the bus stop, whatever, we all see folks that if we think about them, we go, man, what choices is that person making, right? The homeless guy, the person that's, talking to the air, punching his fist at the air, I don't know that person's story, but I can tell you a switch didn't get flipped for them to become that person.
Sure.
Right? Things happened, choices were made. And somebody that is, somebody's son or friend or neighbor that continually relapses and goes back to their old life, that continually makes these decisions. You're like, what are they thinking? Well, they're an unhealthy person making unhealthy choices. And just like I shared, that doesn't mean that they're not responsible for choices, but until they get help, until they reach out and ask for help, their decision-making matrix is completely corrupted and rotten. That they're not going to make healthy choices. Unhealthy people make unhealthy choices. So I'm sorry, I'm getting all rambly here, but it's just the question that you posed was, how do I build accountability? And I got to look for it, and I got to be willing to open myself up to people.
But what you did, you rambled on there, and I loved it, because what you were talking about is what happens if you don't have accountability. And really kind of across that is you were showing the other side. And in many cases, we see people that are in a situation. You mentioned a couple of different things, like what choices happened, what choices they made. But a lot of times there was no accountability to that. And the spiral continued on. And now let's be clear. We do know that in many cases, I think, especially let's talk about a homeless population, there's someone that cares about that person and may have tried to help them many, many times, but the person kept making bad choices or literally ran so far away they don't even know where they are anymore.
Right.
You hear about that all the time. But the bottom line of those situations, though, is that person, as we mentioned earlier, got lost in that pit and have been unable to climb their way out in any way, shape, or form. Bad decisions were made. They just were. There's no way any reasonable person would put themselves in that situation without bad decisions being made, right? I mean, something had to have happened to put them there. That doesn't mean the person deserves it. I want to make sure that I'm being clear whenever I say this. Just because that happened and decisions were made that they were there doesn't mean that someone deserves to be homeless, someone deserves to be in a bad situation, someone deserves that. That is not at all what I'm saying. But clearly decisions were made that put them there. And a lot of times it's because of lack of accountability. And that puts the whole focus of everything differently, because if now you're worried about being held accountable, and first of all, let's go ahead and make sure that we all understand that ultimately we're all going to be held accountable. So I hope you get your ducks in a row there, buddy. But on the other side of it, being held accountable by peers, by mentors, by other folks that understand the struggles that we're dealing with, that helps. I mean, think about it. If you're successful in business, you're probably successful because you've had mentors that help hold you accountable for your business. Why wouldn't you have that for your life as well? Why wouldn't you have someone to help you get over whatever it is that's holding you back from being successful in life as you are in business? And then there's times it's the other way. I'm successful in life. I got a great marriage. I got great kids because I'm being held accountable on that. With my business, I just can't get that done because unfortunately, being successful in the home life doesn't mean you'll be successful in business. Being successful in business doesn't mean you'll be successful in home life. They can be so different in so many cases. But really the answer in almost every case is accountability.
Yep. And having, having concrete and tangible things that I'm working on. Like I was the keen, maybe not, when I was active in my addiction and just like throwing myself into terrible situations, right and left, maybe not so much then, but once I started to attend some meetings and do some things, I was the keen of vague promises, talking to a mentor, talking to the mentorship team, when I was setting up like what my initial boundaries would be like, if this happens, I'm going to try not to do this. And that type of verbiage, just, I'm going to try, or things like a little bit, or, kind of, that type of words, those type of words, they would really hold my feet to the fire. Like, well, what does that mean in concrete terms? What am I going to do? And that's where it's a spiritual battle. And it's also me with my choices, with my concrete choices that I'm choosing on a moment by moment basis. Those things are coupled together. So, to go back to that made up example of if every Friday night I'm going out to this restaurant and I'm flirting with people. Okay, so, I'm not just going to say, I'm not going to flirt. Maybe I need to say, I'm not going to go to that restaurant. Okay, well then what am I going to do on Friday night? Because I've got a habit going on, right? I've got a routine going on. So if that were the case, guys would press in on, okay, so then after work, what am I going to be doing? And then what am I going to do to be accountable to that decision? Am I going, this wasn't forever, but the first several months of my program, because my program was basically 2-year house arrest, voluntary house arrest. Like, it wasn't a legal thing, but it was essentially that. And the first several months, when I would go to work, I had to text a selfie to my mentor. And then if I went to lunch, I would text a selfie to him. And he would always remind me, like, this is not forever, but this is for right now. You're giving up some freedoms, a lot of freedoms in a sense, for a temporary season so that you can have freedom for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And there was hardcore accountability. There was a lot of tangible, concrete correctives that had to be set in place. Not in some cases, some of those infrastructure pieces are going to be there forever. Like I don't ever plan on not being accountable to other godly men in recovery. But am I going to text a selfie, every time I go to lunch? No. But there's certain pieces that are always going to be there. And then there's other pieces where I'll wean myself off over time, but the principle is still in place. Like the way that I'm accountable with what I'm doing online on my phone or on my computer, it might be more heavy duty at first and it might change over time, but there will never be a time that I just freely use whatever device I want, whenever I want, with no accountability. At least for me, that's just not going to be the case. I'm going to have structures in place so that there's always people that can check in on how Logan's doing and what Logan's up to. I mean, because not to take the spotlight, off of, my own personal ownership of stuff. But I mean, if we look at, any sort of leader, a pastor, right? The leader of a ministry, obviously outside of Christianity, just the leader of anything. I mean, why does somebody fall? Because they are too strong, right? They're too powerful. They're too good of a man to need accountability. So I mean, I try to keep that front and center of my brain is, as I'm doing this journey with podcasting and, I'm going to be getting into recovery, social media and that kind of thing. And like, I have got to have heavy duty accountability in place because Satan, my addiction, however you would term it, would want nothing more than for, me reaching out, trying to help people and then allowing those things to take me down. Right.
Okay. So let's touch on that for just a second. Not necessarily in your circumstance of what you're going through right now, but it does happen. We hear about it. We hear about people that have battled and won the battle with addiction, but then they relapse. So let's talk about the relapse cycle just a little bit because that's an elephant in the room. A lot of times that's the elephant in the room. I mean, I know a number of people that have overcome serious addictions only to fall back into it, to get back out of it, to fall back into it. Some of them years worth of this, that just inexplicably, it seems like something sets it off and they get back into whatever it was that had caused so much pain to themselves and their family.
Yeah. I'm going to say one thing, and I am going to be a bit vague, just out of respect for this person. There is someone that I've known for years, has been an active piece of my accountability, active piece of my recovery, who relapsed within the last year. And I've talked to this person about that. And this person would tell you they isolated. There was some physical isolation with moving and job change and that kind of thing, but they didn't immediately replant themselves into accountability. Now, like I said earlier, it doesn't have to look the same way. It doesn't have to mean, okay, you moved across the country and now you're immediately going to find a, Christ-centered sexual addiction group and you're going to go every single week. Like maybe that's not necessarily. Now, for a lot of guys, I would say that probably is a good move, but maybe it doesn't have to be that. But, are you plugging in with text messages with guys? Are you plugging in with phone calls? Are you occasionally going to a meeting, even if it's, once a month? I mean, like, even if it's an AA meeting, right? Because maybe there's not a sexual addiction meeting that's in your area, but are you doing some specific, concrete, tangible things to plug in? And this guy would tell you he did some of that stuff, but not to the level that he needed. So I actually have it pulled up here. So I'm looking at the relapse cycle. And if anybody wants to look at this, I'd give you their website. And if you want to put in the show notes, prodigalsofalaska.com. But there's some different tools on here. And, tools by themselves are not going to set me free. They're not going to heal me. It's like, if I'm going to go to McDonald's for every meal every day, you can tell me about the best gym in the world, but that doesn't do anything if I'm not making healthy changes. But tools are good. And if I am making healthy changes, then having better tools helps me make better choices. So the relapse cycle, I didn't come up with it. Prodigals didn't come up with it. It's a recovery tool. But there's, you could Google relapse cycle, Google image that, and you'll find different images. It looks like an egg or a circle, and there's like different stations. The one on our website, I truly do believe, not being biased, I really do believe that it's probably the best version, just because it really does a good job going through the different stations. So to give a super quick, it starts out with a stress. So a stressor comes into my life. Now, in a lot of cases, I created that stress, but it could also be like, okay, it's a financial stress, or my roof is leaking, or, we've got family staying with us for a month, and that's stressful, whatever. The next is withdrawal, isolation, secrecy. So again, I'm responding to stress and fear and anxiety by isolating. Now, it could be physical isolation. I'm going to hole up in my room. I'm going to, spend more time at work instead of with my family. I'm not going to go to meetings. I'm not going to go to church. It's also usually emotional isolation, and likely it's a combination. The next one is preoccupation, daydreaming. So this might get into fantasy, or it might not even be like a sexual fantasy. It might be I am thinking about things that are not profitable. I'm thinking about things that are not healthy, that are not helping me make good choices. Basically, it's like Pinocchio going to, I don't even remember the term, but he goes to the island of pleasure or whatever, right? It's like, not everything is necessarily evil and destructive. If I'm preoccupied, I'm daydreaming, but I'm not doing the things that are going to help me get ahead. Then the next step is where that preoccupation, that daydreaming, the way I look at it is, so planning and grooming is the next step. It's like preoccupation and daydreaming, there's a lot of internal stuff going on there. Planning and grooming, it starts to become external. It starts to become more tangible. So now I'm setting things in motion. One guy gave an example when we've talked through this in group. He traveled or he still does, travels for work a lot. And he has safety plans and stuff for how he's going to be safe. But he would talk about in the past, in his addiction, he would, get to his hotel room, and as soon as he would get there, he would, set up his computer a certain way. He would, maybe text his wife, to, kind of get her off his back, for a bit, so he could set up some time to look at pornography. He would do things. He would set up the room in a certain way to groom the situation. We think about grooming like a predator grooming their prey, right? Grooming a person, and that's absolutely part of it. But before I ever get to that point, I have to groom myself. I have to groom my brain. I have to groom my thought processes, because ultimately I'm getting myself to accept things that were previously unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm grooming myself. I'm grooming the situation around me. I would give the example too, is I would groom my wife in the sense that I would manipulate her and gaslight her, just like this brother said, kind of get her off my back, so to speak. I would like preemptively groom her as part of this situation. And of course, these are terrible things that I'm not trying to make light of them. I just speak kind of clinically about them.
Yeah.
Which then brings to the top of the cycle, which is acting out. So this is, I'm having an affair. I'm having a sexual encounter. I'm masturbating. I'm, looking up pornography, whatever that looks like. The reinforcement, reward, release. There's obviously, the natural release of, having sex or masturbation. But there's also a lot of release that happens earlier in the cycle, because during that preoccupation and that planning, the fantasy, the flirting, the grooming, for me, I would get a high. I would get a hit every time I got a text back from somebody that I was seeking out. Every time I would, be online, and I would be progressively going to darker and darker websites, kind of moving from the light stuff, and I'm using air quotes, to more of like true pornography. Every time I'm going to another website, I'm getting myself another hit. So I might be getting reinforcement and reward throughout this cycle, at least throughout the first half of it. The next one is despair, self-hatred. So I acted out. I cheated on my wife again. I looked at porn again. I hate myself. I hate that I keep doing this. I'm never going to be healed. I'm never going to get out of this life. I'm only going to keep hurting people. Defensiveness, denial, minimization. This could look different ways. Maybe I'm denying or being defensive about what I did to like my wife or my boss or who knows. More than likely, this is I'm actually doing it to myself. I'm denying to myself how big of a problem I have. I'm denying how badly I need help. I'm denying how badly I need to reach out and put myself out there, which then leads to, towards the bottom here, false resolve. Never again. False resolve is basically that whole, wanting a different outcome, but not doing anything different. Right. I mean, how many times did I pray it's like, it's not even a real prayer, but I would say to God, please, if you forgive me, I will never do this again. I will never cheat on my wife again. I will never look at porn again. That's false resolve, because I didn't do anything different to make healthy choices. I just wished that it would go away.
Right.
And then suppression, which is pretend normal, which is, for me, that was compartmentalization times a million. It was a double life. It was saying to myself mentally, these mental gymnastics, like on the way home from work, after I had another encounter with another woman, or been flirting all day while I'm at work with other women, like, I'm going to say to myself and do whatever I got to do to my own brain so that when I get home, I can say hi to my wife and have some level of relative sanity, so that I'm going to tuck my boys into bed, probably pray with them, maybe read a Bible story to them, and not just like completely have a nervous breakdown. So suppression, pretend normal, that was a place that I lived, not constantly, but almost constantly when I was at home. It was like I had home Logan, and then I had work Logan, because I worked an hour away and I was in sales. And so most of my sexual addiction acting out was when I was at work, with customers, just, on the way home, whatever that looked like. And so I very much compartmentalized my life into addict Logan and then home Logan. So I know that was kind of a shotgun, but again, if people want to check that out, it's up there. But yeah, the relapse cycle is a fantastic tool to look at where this thing goes. And I don't always go through every single station the same way. Sometimes I skip stations. Sometimes I go straight from acting out all the way to pretend normal, and I skip all the rest of it. But I usually would go through those stations. And as we've talked about in group and stuff, it's not just a sexual addiction relapse cycle. That's a sin cycle.
Yeah.
Right. That's me with anger, right? If I rage and I yell at my kids, I can tell you where I was in each of those stations at some point, usually. So it's not just for sexual addiction. It's not just for addiction. That's me making unhealthy choices.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can clearly see that as I looked at that, and folks, we'll mention this again, but you can find that out at prodigalsofalaska.com. That's prodigalsofalaska.com. A lot of other great information out there as well. So you guys go and check that out. Now, before I let you go, I want to ask a question that kind of gets back to who you are now. And that is we've talked about, obviously, the positive impact it's made on you as a father, the positive impact it's made on your marriage. How does it overall affect your just wellness? Your just overall wellness, your self-respect, your self-awareness, your just overall wellness and well-being.
So you didn't send me a list of questions. I wasn't preparing, to answer your questions, right? But this question is something that, without realizing it, I was preparing myself to answer, because I've been reading about your podcast more, and just, I always try to be prepared for where we might go and kind of what your mission is and who your audience is, and that, because and we talked about a little bit of this offline, being well it's such a big thing. It is not, being well is not about being cancer free or drinking a lot of water or getting on the treadmill every day, right? It's a big thing. It's all encompassing. I tried to do little bits of good, little pockets of good where I could when I was in my addiction. I would come home and, pray with my kids before bed. I would read them Bible stories. We'd go to church. As crazy as it sounds, as ridiculous as it sounds, I shared the Bible with people in my addiction at points. Like, as stupid as that was, it was like, well, I'm talking to this person and this thing came up, and in my mind, I was trying to like undercover slip a little bit of good, because 99% of what I was doing was just pure evil, right?
Yeah.
I felt like I couldn't get away from it. And the life that I have now, and I say this with nothing other than just gratitude motivating this statement, the life I have now is not perfect. I'm not perfect, right? But it's open. It's free. I'm able to do good, to share love, to share God's love, to be a loving person without wondering if somebody's going to find out about something, without wondering what somebody would think if they knew the real me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to sound corny, but it's sincere. Anybody who meets me gets the real me now. And that, I couldn't say that for 25 years. It is a destructive and terrible thing to live life, to live in a double life. We were not created for that. And I don't care if somebody's an atheist or somebody believes in God or not. I mean, that is just a pretty fundamental truth. We were not created to have split lives. And yet that's what I had for so long. So for me to just, talk with folks and just be open. And it doesn't mean I share my full testimony with every single person I meet, but I'll tell you right now, I do get to share my story with people fairly often. Sometimes it's a very condensed version, but just as I meet people and as we're talking, because if you want to get to know me, you're going to get to know my God. You're going to get to know my story. You're going to get to know, I wouldn't be the way that I am now if it weren't for the story that God gave me, if it weren't for the recovery that God gave me. So I get to share that with people. And it's just, so my wellness is, every day is every day has its own exercise in humility, right? Its own exercise in working on things that, oh man, I got to keep working on this, keep working on that. But I guess to try to actually answer that question, I am in touch with my wellness. Whereas before I never wanted to look at it because I pretty much knew where it was.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to work on things with full transparency. It's like the light's on and the room's not perfect, but I'm constantly cleaning the room. I'm constantly working on the room. Whereas before there was no way I was about to turn that light on because I knew the darkness. I knew the evil that was in that room. And so now the light's on and we're working on things.
All right. That's very well said. Very well said. Well, part of your mission to help others is you and your wife have a Facebook page where you kind of share your story, right? So tell people where they can find you on Facebook.
Yeah. So, and to clarify, so we have our own Facebook page. It's actually not, we don't really put recovery content in there.
Okay.
So we have, people are more than happy. I can give you the, I don't know how to give it I can give it to you in the show notes. If people want to reach out, that's totally fine. I'm open to that. We're open to that. I'm going to be having a recovery focused Instagram go live here shortly.
Right.
And that is something that is going to be primarily geared towards men that are struggling with sexual addiction. But it's also going to be something where, if somebody wants to learn more about how this works, maybe they're a loved one, they're a parent, whatever that looks like, a spouse, that content will hopefully be, applicable to others as well, but especially geared towards men struggling with sexual addiction. And there's also ways, if a wife has been hurt in this way, then, she can reach out to Carrie. So I can give you, the social media if you want to put on the show notes, and as well as there's an email that goes to me and it goes to Carrie. So that way somebody can reach out if they have a question, if they want to jump on a phone call, or we can respond to an email. And as I said before, it would be disingenuous for me to say, I'm going to be your everything. I can help everyone. I can help fix everyone that comes across the email. No, but God gave me, I very much believe God put me on this earth to give back by sharing, the light of recovery that he's given me. So whatever I can do, whether that's a 10-minute phone call or a few emails back and forth, or whatever that looks like, I want to help anybody that wants to seek help.
Awesome. Well, the Instagram page, if At the time that we're recording this, it is not ready yet, but you will find it in the show notes. So if you're looking for that, be sure and look in the comments of this podcast, and you will find that link. So you can certainly check that out yourself, or you can send it to someone that you feel may be of benefit.
Yeah, by the time the episode's released, it'll be live.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just kind of let you know, I have sent you a connection request on LinkedIn. So I hope that you will accept that. One little side note, we won't go too far down this realm here, but one of the things that Logan does is he actually works on the financial side too. He doesn't really put that out there a whole lot, but he does actually use a lot of the lessons that he's learned in his recovery to help you with your finances. So kind of a cool little thing, a little side note about Logan himself. So I'm sure that you could reach out to him on LinkedIn as well, where a lot of business takes place instead of a lot of the things that we're talking about today, where those are actually better fit on some of the other platforms. Really, man, I'll tell you, very interesting story, very inspirational to see what you have overcome. And I really do appreciate you sharing that with the audience today.
I so appreciate you giving me the platform. As I always tell people, I'm just looking for rooftops to shout from, that, hey, there is a way out. There's a different way to live. And so I do not take it for granted anybody that's willing to let me shout from your rooftop. So I thank you very much, Harlan.
You are very welcome, sir. And don't forget, folks, if you want to go and look at some of the tools that are out there, public facing, you don't have to sign for anything. You don't have to give anyone any information. If you don't want someone to find out you went and started looking for these tools, you open your incognito window, and then you can go out to prodigalsofalaska.com. That's prodigalsofalaska.com. Lots of different information. I love how you even have a little checklist there so that maybe you can determine, is this a problem that I have, or is it all in my head? Wait a second. It's the same thing. Never. Okay, there I go. I'm going off on a tangent again, like I like to do. But folks, it's having this resource is invaluable. I think that something that you said is so important, and that is a change in even location. Because of a support system you might have had in place, a change in location can cause, I think in some cases, maybe irreversible damage, because a lot of times that relapse, people can lose trust in you that had gained trust in you because you had changed things. So use the tools that are out there. If you have an opportunity to speak with Logan, or you have an opportunity to get involved in his one of his social media outreaches, take advantage of it, because these are vital tools to help you in your journey to a better you, to a better overall well-being. Any final comments you'd like to make, Logan?
No, I thank you for having me, and to you listening, I really appreciate you taking the time to open yourself up. No matter what you thought you were going to be getting, I appreciate, and I don't take for granted that you took this time to listen to this, and I hope that it's beneficial.
All right. Thank you again, buddy. I appreciate you being on here. Hey, blessings to you and your wife. And, I will continue to pray for your continued recovery, because it's always about recovery. The journey is never ending. That is the path that each one of us have. But will all of us that leave will get to one day know that we're going to be sin-free, and that we're going to have an eternity with our Lord and Savior. So hope everyone enjoyed today's broadcast. I don't even feel like telling you about all the other kind of things that we do. You know what we do. Y'all be sure and catch us on some of our other shows. Don't forget, though, you can always go out and subscribe to Health and Well Power Hour at hwpowerhour.com, or just keep on finding it at your favorite podcast location. Thanks, everyone. We are out of here.